Smile is a movie I went in having no real expectations for. I knew what it was, and I knew it had to do with people going around just smiling creepily at you, which was something that, of course, had been in horror movies before, but it hadn't really been done the way this movie does it, where it's kind of like the main focus of the movie, just having these creepy smiling people just sort of like stalking you in a way, or just showing up in places you don't expect. And it's just just the expression in and of itself is really goddamn creepy, and this movie takes full advantage of that. So pretty much what Smile is about is the main character is a doctor at a hospital. There is a patient that comes in who is just ranting and raving about seeing these people like smiling at her or something, and she's just having a complete panic attack, and she ends up basically killing herself in front of the doctor. Before she kills herself, she of course makes the creepy smiling expression before just slitting her own throat. And yeah, so that's pretty much how the movie starts. And the main character is pretty kind of traumatized by this experience. She goes home and just tells her husband about what happened to her, and that she's just, of course, had a hard day with this person just pretty much killing herself. Well, not pretty much, but, of course, just killing herself in front of her. And this is how the plot kind of kicks off, because the main character soon finds out that the creepy smiling people that the patient that killed herself in front of her had been seeing is actually real, because she starts to experience this herself by seeing different people just smiling at her. And that's pretty much this whole movie, is her trying to find out what this thing is and how to get rid of it. She's pretty much just suffering from having these people just show up around her and stalk her, and she seems to be the only one that can really see them. This movie seems to be heavily inspired by movies like The Ring, for instance, because it has a very similar premise in that once you learn more about what this thing is, that it's this entity that just takes that is passed on from one person to another, from one person that starts seeing these people everywhere and ends up just becoming one of these people themselves, these creepy smiling people, and just killing themselves in front of the next potential victim, and then it just passes on to the next person and the next person and the next person in a similar way. It's just this cycle, basically, and the main character pretty much has to find out how to break the cycle, how to get out, how to basically beat this entity. Part of the movie is kind of a mystery in a way, because she has to find out how she can do this. And she eventually, not spoil too much about it, comes to find out there was a person that broke the cycle, and how he broke the cycle was killing another person. And in that sense, it's a little bit similar to The Ring, in that with The Ring, it was a cursed videotape that would get shown to somebody. And once it's shown to somebody, once Sadako coming out of the well is shown to a person, they have like 7 days to live. And the main character in that movie, with her ex-husband, has to find out more about Sadako and the cursed videotape, in order to find out how to break the curse or how to get out of it. In the plot for Smile, it is pretty similar, where the main character, the doctor, and not her ex-boyfriend, but someone who had like a crush on her for a while, has to try to find out more about the entity and how to potentially beat the entity, how to basically free herself from it in a way. And it also kind of goes into the main character's own past, because we do learn that the entity kind of feeds off of your trauma. Like it potentially, I guess, targets people who have had like past trauma or something, and takes advantage of that. In this way, it's also a bit of a psychological horror at times, because you don't really know what's real or not. Like as I was watching this movie, I was like questioning like what was really, if what was really happening was actually happening, or if it was just something that was in her head, because there are quite a few scenes where it does end up being in the main character's head. Like, it's not actually happening. She's just having like a nightmare, or she's the only one seeing it. And you kind of just are asking yourself these questions as you're watching the movie. I like how it does that. It kind of keeps you guessing in a lot of ways. The plot, in a lot of ways, is not anything that original. Like, we have had other movies, horror movies, where there would be some kind of a curse, or that, specifically J-horror, of course, with The Ring, but also in American horror, where you would have some kind of demonic entity or some kind of spirit or something, where the main character basically has to look into the history of it to try to figure out how to get rid of it or something. That's something we've seen before, but not necessarily in this way. I think the idea of this smile entity or demon is pretty interesting. I haven't really seen it done like this before. Of course, like I said, we have seen similar things, but not necessarily in the way that this movie does it. This movie does rely quite a bit on the jump scares, however, which is one thing I liked, and at the same time I didn't like. Let me explain. There are some pretty effective jump scares in this movie. One in particular, jump scares don't usually get me, because I've seen so many horror movies at this point where I can predict almost every jump scare and it never gets me. And there were some ones in this movie where I saw them coming. But this one, however, like this one and a few others actually got me. I don't want to, like, again, I'm not going to spoil the scene. Basically, like, I'll just say, like, you think the jump scare is going to come from one source, but it ends up coming from another one. And I didn't anticipate that at all. I thought it was just going to be coming from this one thing in particular, but it comes from something else. And I mean, some people might see it coming, but I did not at all. And the way in which the jump scares to me started to get a little bit annoying, because there were effective ones, there were definitely ones that worked, but it started to feel like they relied a little bit too much on them. And there were also more than a few fake out jump scares, which are the worst, in my opinion. I hate when horror movies do this. It's funny, I guess, but more than once, it's excessive. And this movie has a few of them. One of them is when the main character is opening like a tin of cat food, and it just cuts to that scene, and it's just, the sound is just enhanced or turned up, basically, of her, just quickly, like, kind of opening the tin, and it's sort of supposed to be like, kind of almost make you jump moment. You think it's going to be something else, but it's just her doing something mundane, like opening cat food. It reminded me, actually, of the stupid Pop-Tart jump scare from Silent Hill Revelations, where the scene just cuts to a Pop-Tart popping out of a toaster, and it was stupid. It's just as stupid in this movie, in my opinion. But aside from the jump scares, this movie actually does have a decent atmosphere as well. The soundtrack is really, really good, really effective. I really think that this movie proves that horror movies really need to focus on the sound, not just the soundtrack, but also just how the soundtrack, like, lends itself to the experience, like, to the atmosphere of the movie, and to just the general eerie, creepy feel that you might be trying to get with a horror movie. And I feel like this movie definitely does that. And that, there's definitely some creepy, some really unsettling tracks here, especially when there's something about to happen. And I think it really lends itself very well to the movie and really complements the atmosphere. Also, let me talk about the atmosphere, because the atmosphere in this movie was really good. There is a lot of scenes, like I said, it's not just jump scares. There are a lot of instances, and I really think the reason why this movie is so effective in how it can actually scare you, even if you are like a veteran, someone who's seen quite a few different horror movies, is that there are a lot of scenes where it just lingers. It just lingers on things, and there might be something that just shows up in the background. You're just kind of like scanning the scene, because it'll just like stay on a scene for a while, and you're like looking in the background to try to find something. And sometimes you'll see something, and it's just there. It's just something or someone is just standing like in the darkness, just right out of your view, just kind of standing there. Like, that stuff, more than jump scares, more than anything, really, like, that stuff really gets to me. I don't like when there are things just creeping around in the background, just kind of just hanging out in the darkness, just right out of your view. And then eventually the scene might draw attention to it. And when the scene does draw attention to it, it's just slowly creeping out, just creeping towards you. And it's just really that anticipation, that buildup of a scare that is kind of the scariest thing to me. When it's not really like in your face and pronounced. Like maybe it does end up being that way, but it's just a slow creeping fear. It's there, and it's not like trying to be loud and bombastic. Maybe sometimes it is, but most of the time it's just this slow like creeping dread. And I really think that's effective, and I really wish more horror movies would do this, because to me that's the scariest thing. And this movie does have quite a few scenes where it's like that. And I also think the general cinematography of the movie as well is really, really good. There's a lot of these weird upside down camera angles, which kind of lends to this like uneasy feeling that the movie is trying to give you. But I also think what really sold me on this movie, aside from just the general, like the jump scares actually being fairly good for the most part in this movie, and the atmosphere, was the ending. Not the ending in and of itself, but the ending sequence where this character goes to like this abandoned house. Of course, typical horror movie trope. The main character goes to this creepy abandoned building in the middle of nowhere, which is basically what happens in the ending sequence of this movie. But the thing that chases after her in this, or is kind of like going after her, is... I have to compliment the, I don't know if this was an actual, like, actor that portrayed this creature or what they were doing here, but it looked creepy as hell. Like, this movie does a good job of just making normal people look creepy as hell with, like, the weird, creepy smile, but this thing at the end, it kind of went above and beyond. In some ways, like, it reminded me of... Maybe this is giving it too much credit, but a little bit of The Thing, just to give you an idea of what this thing kind of is. And I really liked that. I was like not really expecting it, and it was really good. I really enjoyed that sequence in particular. I think that really like I said, really sold me on the movie. But what aside from some of the other things I've mentioned. This movie, it's not great. It definitely has some problems. The main issue, so two of the main issues for me is the movie definitely feels like it drags a little bit at times. Like I don't think it's a long movie, but it kind of feels that way. I can't really put my finger on it, but it feels like this movie definitely could have had its runtime shaved down like just a little bit, like maybe like knock off 10 to 15 minutes if I could guess, because it definitely feels like at some point when I was watching the movie, I was kind of like wondering, okay, are we getting close to the end now? Because it just felt like it outstayed its welcome a little bit. Like it just felt like it's kind of drug on a little bit, just too long. The other thing too is just the like I mentioned, the somewhat of the lack of originality in its not its premise, because I feel like its premise is actually fairly original, but it's kind of wrapped up in typical horror movie tropes and a horror movie plot that we're kind of familiar with, and the ending itself doesn't really definitely reinforces that, because the main issue with this movie, the other main issue is predictability. You definitely, if you've seen, like I said, you've seen movies like this before, if you've seen a lot of horror movies. And if you've seen a lot of horror movies, then you probably know where this movie is going, especially by the end of the movie. And I'll just say, yeah, it goes there. Again, trying really hard not to spoil it. But yeah, it's a fairly predictable movie. Does that mean it's bad? No, it just means that it's predictable, and it doesn't really do anything particularly new with how the mystery, I guess, is presented. One other thing too, I want to say is that I really liked about the movie was it's somewhat of its ambiguity in regards to this smile demon entity, that it doesn't really go too deep into how it works. Like, we know some basic things about how it works, but not really anything other than that. Like, we don't really go into like the origins of it, like where it comes from, where did it start, how did it come about. Like, we don't know anything about that, which I really appreciate. I was actually expecting this movie to have somewhat of a twist in regards to like what this thing is and what it wants, what it's doing. But maybe like thinking more about it, maybe it's for the best that it kind of sticks to general horror movie conventions and that it's just this supernatural force that isn't really explained and we only know some things about it, but not a lot of other things. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe because I feel like the twist I kind of wanted it to go with would have been kind of, in and of itself, kind of cliche. Because, I mean, we have seen horror movie twists before that kind of basically say that, you know, okay, this thing isn't actually like a real supernatural thing. It's actually, it has like things that it could be logically explained, right? And I actually thought that's where this was going. That this was actually something that wasn't supernatural in its origin, but actually was something else that could be explained just by, you know, maybe it's a drug or maybe it's some kind of a hallucination, some shared hypnosis kind of thing or something like that. And I honestly, I'm kind of glad it didn't go there because I feel like in that too, like I said, would have been cliche because we've seen that before as well. I guess it really just depends on how that's done. But I appreciate the ambiguity of it, that it really didn't try to explain too much about what this thing was. Guys, despite its flaws, I really enjoyed this movie. It was a lot of fun, especially in a theater. I know you can actually watch this on video on demand now. So no matter how you want to do it, I recommend you go and check this movie out. I think it's right up there with Terrifier 2 in some of the best movies that have come out, the best horror movies that have come out this year. We still have a month left in 2022, so that, I mean, maybe there could be something that comes out that surpasses this movie in Terrifier, or Terrifier 2. But in my opinion, it's right up there with Terrifier 2. And that being said, I'll have to give it a 2 thumbs up. Really, really enjoyed this one. I know there's a lot of people saying that it's not that great, it's just okay. And I don't know. I found myself really enjoying the movie despite it, like I said, not being the most original thing ever in some of its plot. But I thought that the concept, like I said, the idea of these things, of these people just kind of stalking you with these creepy smiles, it's just it's such a simple premise. It's just so crazy how such a simple premise can be also just, you know, one of the more original ideas in horror movies, and I feel like that's definitely the case here. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about this movie if you've seen it, and yeah, until next time, I will see you all later.